All right, so I'm going to start construction on my cryptid mask or mythological mask, mythological creature. I'm going with a cryptid and a cryptid of, and I'll share my screen, of the Loveland Frogman, just because it's goofy, weird, and a giant frog man, person, bipedal thing. Basically, the description is around the swamps in Loveland, Ohio. Multiple sightings of a very large, standing upright frog. And there's, like any of them, there's plenty of a description, discussions, all that such. But yeah, I just figured it'd be kind of fun, play off, especially off of the design of like the frog skull. That would actually translate nicely to building on top of my hat that I'd already built, my little head frame. So I'm looking at projecting the frog skull basically on and connecting it onto my cap. So that's what I'm going to be doing. So first things I'm going to do really is I built this cap last class. This works well. These parts are just pinned in place because I needed them there. But I'm going to start constructing, after I take all the ears and bobbles and whatnots, I'm going to start constructing off of my cap that I built, the very stylish, making a frog skull around this. Now, whether or not I have the floppy jaw thing action, I don't know. I've seen a few examples that have or a few descriptions that have some sort of a crest. So maybe I'll leave this for now. But basically, I'm going to be working off of the idea of a frog skull. And whether or not I'm going to build it more of out in front of my head or sunk further back, I'm not sure yet. But one of the reasons I chose this cryptid one, because it's just weird and fun, is I can basically build the frog skull separate from my cap and then merge them after the fact once I decide really of the placement of elements. So you don't have to, so don't feel like you have to build off of this cap as a starting point. Is it helpful? Absolutely. It's a great place to start, but it's not the only way to start. So basically what I'm going to start by is taking some rough measurements and building out from there. So I'm going to go back to my sketches and rough out a quick sketch again, and I will start my Loveland Frogman. All right. So I'm working with something that I want to have dimensions. Looking at my examples, obviously it's going to go above my head, so I want it to be at least 10 inches tall, but that's just the head part. I still have to figure out how I'm going to do the neck, things like that, and that's where I was saying that I'm not sure exactly of the placement of the skull. Because if I look at my example, which is terrifyingly looking at a frog skull, as you need to do for reference, is just a skull of a Goliath frog, which already mighty impressive name for a frog. I'm looking at this frame here, which will be largely the jaw, because it's quite large, and figuring out really where my head would go within something like that. And I'm thinking that basically the eyes will be much further out, and it will look to be, if I'm giving it a rough dimension just by eyeballing, if the top of the head here is 10 inches tall and the skull itself looks to be at very least twice as long or as wide as it is tall, that gives me, I need to make my skull roughly 20 inches wide, which outright, that's going to be pretty big. Because if I'm looking at 20 inches, that's about to there. It's a big frog. So I'm going to start by looking at my cardboard. Now, we talked last class about being careful about the orientation of your corrugation. This piece, all the corrugation is going parallel, lengthwise to the frame. I built a lot of my cap here with corrugation going perpendicular. Now today, I'm just going to work on roughing out a skull, a frame for this piece. And I'm going to need to build that basically big old horseshoe frame that is the mouth of a frog. So to do that, I need to consider structure. And whereas this cap here, when I built it, I know, gotta wear the cap, thinking cap or just screwing around cap, often the same thing. My corrugation, yes, goes lengthwise or perpendicular, and it folds in the direction I want very easily. But I kind of want it to be a little bit stronger. And this is actually very strong, and realistically, this would be a perfectly fine way to go. But I'm not just making this in one flat frame because this needs to be a little thin. Frog lips are thin. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to use the cardboard that I cut that has the corrugation in parallel in length, and I'm going to fold that. And the reason I'm doing this, and if you're doing this on your own, you'll see, for one, obviously it makes it thinner. But just like stamped metal or anything like that, metal on its own is kind of like paper. That's really floppy. However, if you put a simple fold into it, it suddenly becomes much stronger. Yes, it's still floppy, but it becomes much stronger. So I'm going to do the same thing with this cardboard here. I'm going to fold this, it's not even really in half. I'm just making like a V shape. This now becomes a lot stronger. Now, is it more awkward for me to bend backwards? Oh yeah, by a lot. But there's a ways around that. Now, I just folded this a little bit, and unfortunately that just tore also, but that's where one of the original folds in the box itself was. So with this, what I can do is I can make slits. I'm not just scoring it, I'm cutting all the way in. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut part of the way so that when it folds, it overlaps onto itself. I'll show you what I mean. Let me look down here. Give myself a little more working space. And right now, I'm just kind of estimating some things. I just want to see a couple of test pieces and see really where I need to make these scores and these folds, because I'm just kind of winging it. But now that those are cut in, not all the way, obviously, but I can now fold that and it overlaps a bit. And I can glue that in place. I can do the same over here. And I'm starting to make a really quite strong but thin frame that will become my frog lips. So I'm going to keep doing this until I kind of get where I'm liking it. And the good thing about building this way, what I'm planning is this is going to be half. So my intention is to build one and then just bring the other piece and copy it. So this will be basically the whole frog mouth. There we are, trying to get it to focus a little bit better. So as I said, definitely use clothespins to hold things in place. Just going to put a little dollop of glue here. And this may well not be the end all piece. I may well see what I like about this and keep some. Maybe I'll remake it. I don't know. Right now, I just am trying to figure out how to translate this from frog skull to cardboard. And that's why I was saying you don't have to have all the answers outright. Cardboard is pretty easy to come by. Aside from those of you that are having difficulty getting some, I'm sorry. I thought that it would be a little more immediately available to everybody. That's why I was using it as a main material. But I'm just going to start by gluing a few pieces together here. And I can always, of course, adjust this a little bit. I can either remelt the glue or just slice in a different spot and just get a sense of where I'm building this out to. So after looking at multiple references and making some adjustments to my frame here, I added in that one center addition there that joins my two halves together. And when I take my tape, yep, all the way to the back, Zoom out a little bit. All the way to the back is about 20 inches. Cool. All right, so this will become my frame. So somewhere, somehow, my cap will fit into this, and I will have a giant frog head morphed over mine. Just what my mom always wanted. So I'm letting these parts cool. There's quite a lot of heat because I put quite a good amount of glue with this front part. Then I'm going to start figuring out the rest of it. But as I said, I am basing mine, at least the base model components, off of, and I will share my screen again, off of looking at various frog skulls. So I just have this, just a common, I think, bullfrog pulled up. And then I was cycling through a different example of this Goliath frog skull replica I found. Just looking at the images, don't need a physical representation, nor do I need the specific details. I do, however, need the general frame. So that's what I'm looking for, and that's what I'm basically joining in. So this will become the outer frame, the lips, the upper jaw. I'm going to build a structure that matches, that gets more of the center line part of the skull, and I will worry about the lower jaw after I get that built, because it will be much easier for me to keep everything in place once I have the upper skull, upper jaw, and all that stuff in place and roughed out. So that's what I'll be working on. So as I said, I've got my frame here, just the lips for the mouth, got more or less where I'm going to put my head, my hat head, whatever. Not really sure about that yet, but I'm going to put some sort of a bridge across the skull here, which is shown in the actual skeleton itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold a piece of cardboard in half so that way I can mirror it more easily. But to do that, I need to score this. And that's also why I wanted this corrugation to go in line. Now, scoring is cutting into cardboard or whatever material, but not all the way through. Just make sure you have something underneath that is not your hand or leg when you're cutting this. And I'm cutting just between the corrugations. Doesn't have to be perfectly straight, but it helps if it's pretty straight. Again, I'm using a razor knife, so be very careful. So with that scoring, I can fold it in half much more easily, but also that fold in there, and I might actually put a double fold in, I'm not sure just yet, but this will really help strengthen the frame. But from here, now I can more easily draw and cut what I want for the webbing, for the skull here. So first, I want to cut this so it's at least mirrored. Again, just be careful while you're cutting. I'm using a razor knife, and it's a nice fresh blade, which means it cuts well, but problem is it also means that it cuts well. So just be careful that you're not cutting through the cardboard into the hand meat. And again, I'm just kind of roughing this out. I can always fine tune this later. Unless you cut too much off, then it's a lot more difficult to add to it, but not impossible. Just going through, slicing as best I can. Obviously, I have to trim that front, but now I have this kind of bridge that will go up and over the skull. So I'm going to go ahead and try to shape this front half a little bit so it matches up to here. With that, I think it'd be easier to just use scissors. So that effect, a little more. Probably should have done this part first. Oh well, can always, if I really have to, I can always redo it, I guess. Getting there. That's about right. So this will be the upper bridge of my big old frog skull. Not too shabby looking. Kind of awkward, but of course, as soon as you start getting actually a full skull in, it starts looking super creepy. So I'm going to keep working on this, get it to a plot spot that I like, and check it again. All right, so I got the front part cut. What I did is I turned the whole frame around and such. But what I realized is I need the frog skull to go up a little bit because I forgot they have a bit more of a snout. So what I did is I put a slit all the way across, basically just like I was doing for the rest of this, but so that it matches the front there. And I'm going to glue down in here. And again, that glue is screaming hot, so just be cautious. I didn't realize how hot this hot glue gun was really keeping the glue. And unfortunately, I can't get a clamp down around here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue this up in place, and then I'm going to fold the bridge of the skull back a bit more effectively. But I just have clothespins holding the sides if they stay put. And I'm going to glue this center point in, and that'll allow me to work a little more effectively. Okay, so one of the things I did, it's cooling off now, but one, I realized I kind of needed to add a bit more up because the snout wasn't quite tall enough. So I added another cut there, but what I'm going to end up doing is folding this upper bridge a little bit. So you can see it's a bit of an angle so that it holds that shape a little more effectively. I'm going to do this first because then I'll address the snout here because this is all too floppy to work with. But how I'm going to have it keep this shape is I'm just going to cut this small section of cardboard corrugation going parallel. But what I did is I made a couple of scores here and made a couple of tabs. And I'm going to glue this up underneath here so that it keeps this bridge folded just a little bit. And what I mean by that is I'm going to find a spot, and I'm kind of just picking this a little bit arbitrarily for now, probably somewhere in the front here. But I'm going to glue this underneath in place, and that's going to keep this top skull plate here from unfolding. So it's just this little bridge down in here. Doesn't take a lot, but it's going to keep it from unfolding on me. So I'm going to pin this in place with clothespins first. Find a good spot. And then glue it up. Mainly, I just want to make sure that it's going to be folded enough. So that's why it's easiest to put this stuff in place and then glue it. So yeah, it's kind of arbitrary. It doesn't really matter at the moment, but that ought to work. And I'll turn this over just so it's a little bit more even, just for my own sake. And if you're really unsure, best thing, mark it. Mark out what you're doing. I'm just tracing the corners. That way, when I lift these tabs here to get glue underneath it, I can make sure that it goes right back where it's supposed to go. Lift there. Little squiggle of glue on the tab. That now goes right back where it was. Do the same thing on the other side. See, because when I let that go, this whole thing goes flat again. That's why I'm making these tabs. That's why I'm making this fold. So it keeps that rigid and doesn't let it flop off. There we go. So let those cool. That'll help me hold the upper skull plate in place. Then I can address the nostrils up here. So now that the backside's cooling a little bit, and it's going to keep that shape, now I'm going to try and fix the nose, the bridge here. Like I said, I ended up cutting the first section, the first slits, a little too short or a little too close to the lip, because looking at the skull more closely, and this isn't an accuracy thing, it's just more of it will make it more frog shaped. The bridge comes up a little more, a little snout, a little snoot for its nostrils. So what I'm going to need to do is fix this part, but still let this part fold. So to do the front here, what I'm going to do is I cut a couple of just pieces of cardboard, and I'm going to glue these onto here just to help back and support what I did there before. Now, it would make sense to possibly actually fold these into little triangles and glue these in place this way. But what I should have done is cut these a little bit larger so they have a little bit more of a flat tab. And I can still just make a little fold here. It's not like that's impossible. Because like I said, a butt joint, which is just sticking something straight down, is not nearly as strong, so like so, as it would be with like these little flaps on the sides that allow those to sit down flat, and there's just a lot more surface area. So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna fold these kind of into these little W's. I'm gonna glue these across, and that will help shore that whole thing up. All right, my little brackets have cooled enough in there. That's helped support everything. Probably could have even made those on the outside and made them into snout holes, but I can always do something like that. But now I need to fix this part. So in order to affix the top plate of the skull, whoops, there we are, to what's going to be the snout and jaw here, I need to be able to make use of these little flaps here where these overlap. That's cut straight, but when I fold this down, these become overlaps. What I'm going to do is I'm going to score a little wedge here, and then I'm going to back these with something, not unlike what I just did. So first, I'm just going to slice. Be careful, don't slice all the way through. Just going to make a couple of cuts there that will allow that to fold over. And all I'm doing this for is just because it helps make a better connection. Anytime you can overlap something, it's going to be stronger. And that's it. I'm just going to go ahead and glue those on, and then I'll figure out the supports behind it. All right, so I flipped this skull over, and so that I can add some support to this, I'm going to do something akin to what I did for these supports here. I folded a piece of cardboard with the corrugation going parallel in line, and I just folded these little wings up. These corners a little steeper, these corners a little more shallow, because I'm just trying to get those to more or less meet there and there. This is gonna be a bridge going back and forth across here, and that's gonna support everything right here. So do a little glue up, and that'll be good. So while that's cooling, one thing I did want to show you all is, let me zoom in here. Sometimes the glue gets a little bit wonky. Now this is on the inside, so it won't really matter, but just to show you, yeah, of course you can add more glue, no problem. But what happens if it kind of gets all gloppy and such and you're working on the outside? You can use the tip of the glue gun and just plunge it into the hot glue, or what is now cooled glue, and let it remelt the glue. Now I'm of course also adding stuff, and you can remelt the glue a little bit and allow it to blend and smooth. Now, obviously you got to let it recool, no problem. I'm adding a fair bit, probably too much glue here, but whatever. I'm just making really sure that this stays reinforced, because this is a main support area until I get the rest of the thing built. So it's a really simple trick, especially if you have one that has like the whole tip is metal, not just the very tip. But this is a really easy way to remelt glue that's already in place and kind of redistribute it or smooth it down so that, as opposed to like using a knife or scissors and trimming and cutting excess parts. All righty, so we're letting that cool. It's going to take a little bit, but basically I'll be taking my fun hat and affixing my giant frog skull, which also kind of looks like a snake head right now, to that next class. So stay tuned for that part.